Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. It is a privilege, and I'm excited to be with you again for another episode and another conversation about issues that are impacting the Black community. Again, I am your host, Nora Muhammad, and I just want to, for those who may be listening for the first time, I just want to talk a little bit about this podcast and why you may find the content to be specifically geared towards the Black community. And it is. There's a reason for that. I, first, am a Black woman, and the Black community is my community. It's the group of people that I'm closest to. It's the group of people that I come from. It is the group of people who impact me the most. And as I am and desire to continue to be a credible messenger for my people, relaying ideas and thoughts and insights that are relevant to our community. I certainly want the world to be a better place. I certainly want the country to be a better place. I certainly want the relations of people of all nationalities and backgrounds to improve and to be better. For me, though, I believe that I have to start at home. Right? The saying that charity starts at home and then spreads abroad. I am not biased against anyone. I am in service to my people. And I think anyone who has really looked at history and did an insightful and thorough investigation, then you will find that there are no people in a worse condition than the Black man and Black woman in North America. Having the history that we have, having the lack of opportunities, having the systemic oppressive conditions that we experienced in the past and experience today, and the general stripping away of our entire identity to become a different people in this experience that we've had in North America. And we certainly do question this new identity that we have, and this new thinking that we have, and the new diet that we have that we've gained since we've been on the continent of North America. We have been a people that have been totally rearranged, so much so that when our brothers and sisters come from the continent of Africa, they don't recognize us. They don't recognize us in our language. They don't recognize us in our disposition. They don't recognize us in our apathy. They don't recognize us in our self-hatred. Not that others don't have apathy, not that others don't have self-hatred, but the Black man and Black woman have it to such an extent that we are now not just destructive to each other, but we are destructive to others. And so, being that the Black man and Black woman are in the worst state of condition of any people that have ever existed and have suffered the most horrendous crimes against humanity that there are, I know that in the medical field, as we're dealing with the awful pandemic of COVID-19, then you attend to the patients that are most in need of care, those who have the severest of the illness, those who are suffering the most, those who are the most critical. They're the ones that you take to the intensive care unit. They're the ones that you bring down the ratio of nurses to patients, because that patient, that individual, is most in need of the greatest care. And that is the Black man and Black woman. And so that is my community. That is the community that I come from. And so as a servant to my people, I know that if I want to see a better world, then I have to start with my own people. And I'm so proud and honored to do so. And I'm proud and I'm honored that you have come along with me in this journey of the Nora Speaks podcast to listen to your sister, and hear what it is that I have to say. I do not claim to be the author of the wisdom that I share. However, I will share all of the wisdom that I receive and pass it along. All of the understanding that I've gained, the experiences that I've had, that I've been able to filter through a new lens and share it with those who listen to this podcast. So I am just so grateful, and I believe that I am fortunate to have the understanding that I have today and have the will and the ambition to want to share it with you, because I love my people, and we can't love our people and not serve the people. So, that's a little bit of the foundation of the Nora Speaks podcast. As you heard in the opening, the goal here is to tug on the soul and consciousness of the Black community. Consciousness, because I believe we have fallen asleep. I believe that we are like the walking dead in this country, and we don't have our real identity. We are not speaking our native language, certainly, and we're not thinking our thoughts, our natural thoughts. And that is evidenced by the lack of success that we see in our community. That is evidenced by the substandard conditions that so many of us live, by the substandard morality that so many of us exhibit, by the heinous ways that we do harm to ourselves and our people. So there's certainly a need of some rehabilitation, some reformation. And when I'm talking to young people about the so-called emancipation of the slaves, I say these were a people who have been traumatized for generations and generations and generations. They've witnessed trauma. They've been victims of trauma. And then they were just set free and said, okay, go on about your merry way. And how unfair and how unfortunate that is, that a people who could not read, could not write, who had no sense of building an economy or a society, and so many of them just returned right back to the plantations and went from slaves to sharecroppers, which is really a distinction in name only. And so our people were just let go and were told just to go on their way with so little skills and with no way and with nothing provided for them so that they can make a way for themselves. If our children are graduating from college and they want to go out on their own, we give them a little something if we have it so that they can have something to get started. We had nothing to get started. In addition to that, we did not have any rehabilitation. We did not have any reformation. A people who had been literally traumatized, brutalized in the worst that we have ever witnessed. And we were just let go. And so when we are talking about, trying to help folks who have had trauma in our modern day, we talk about trauma-informed care. We talk about the way trauma impacts us physiologically and mentally and spiritually and emotionally. But that treatment or that attention was just not given to us. And because that treatment and attention was not given to us in 1865, 1867, 1870, and all down through the generations, then we find ourselves in such a disrepaired state today, where now, instead of working so hard in a struggle against the author of our oppression, now we turn that energy and we work hard against each other and with very little progress to show for it. So the Nora Speaks is a podcast that tugs on the soul and the consciousness of the Black community, because I want us to have an awakening. I want us to have a renaissance that is one that is going to demonstrate that we are a people with dignity. We are a people with integrity. We are a people with intelligence and love of ourselves. And once we are able to demonstrate that for ourselves and to ourselves, then I believe that others around the world will recognize us. But until such time, we remain as if we are a child in a parent's house and we are asking for opportunities and we are asking for access. But when you are an owner, right, when you are the author and the operator, then you do not ask for access, because it's yours. So as I am journeying in this podcast realm, I'm very thankful and I'm very grateful because I know that I do have something to say, and I'm blessed because God has given me something to say. And I know that because of that, then I have to be reciprocal and I have to demonstrate my gratitude through the work that I do, through this podcast and other avenues that I work with my people. And so this Nora Speaks podcast is just one avenue for me to do that. And so as I introduced the podcast and talked about why, this exists, I want to introduce this specific episode 140. And this podcast episode is titled Dominant with a Recessive Mindset. Dominant with a Recessive Mindset. So this idea was actually born a couple years ago. There was a girls' conference at Temple University, and I was fortunate to be invited to be a speaker and to do several workshops. And although my workshops were about character and character development, as happens when you're speaking with people, then you can't just stay on the subject that you've been given to talk about. We have to be able to be flexible enough to speak to what's in and on the minds of our people. And any good preacher will tell you this. Yes, you can go to the rostrum with your sermon, but once you are looking at your people and interacting with your people, they will lead you just where you need to go in terms of the content of the conversation. And so as I was speaking with these young women in one of the groups, as I'm talking about bad character and some things that are traits of bad character, and I talked about self-hatred and lack of confidence and low self-esteem. And so a young lady asked me about why that would be a bad character trait. And so I started by coming to her and letting her know that for us not to have confidence and love of ourselves, there was something that happened, that there is some damage that has happened. And I said that for someone to doubt who they are, something happened to them because we are not born in doubt, right? When a baby is born, when an infant is born, that baby starts doing something called rooting, right? And that is when the baby is eyes closed, but is searching around for the mother to nurse that child or to receive a bottle. But those who've been around infants, how they root around until they find that which is going to give them nourishment. Hopefully in your household, it was your mother's breast and you were nursed. But if not, and if you had a bottle, you understand that when a child or infant is hungry, that infant is going to have a natural expectation that there is something that's going to be present here for me to receive sustenance, right? The baby doesn't look around, identify the source of the sustenance, and then start rooting, giving the signal that I'm hungry. No, the baby starts rooting around, eyes closed, because that baby, that infant, is born with the expectation that his or her needs are going to be met. There is no doubt. There is no doubt there, right? So if we are not born in doubt, uncertainty, right? That's what doubt is. Where or at what point in our lives is doubt put into us, and why is it? So as this conversation progressed, I came to the point to explain to these young women that the idea for a Black girl to doubt or to be uncertain or to be insecure, and specifically we were talking about self-image in the context of this conversation. And the young lady who happened to ask the question was a beautiful, beautiful chocolate dark-skinned girl. And so I'm explaining how we can be imbued with doubt. So take, for instance, what we see on television. Take, for instance, the commercials that we see whether it's Revlon or Maybelline. I mean, they talk about loving women and empowering women. There's no Revlon or Maybelline commercial that comes on and tells women that you are beautiful just the way you are. You don't need any artificial adaptation for you to be beautiful. No, they have a product that they want to sell us. And so they're going to tell us that you need lush lashes. They're going to tell us you need lush lips because your lashes are inadequate and your lips just don't cut it, right? So for them to sell their product, for them to convince us that we need that product, they have to put doubt in us, right? So that's there. We're talking about cosmetics. We're talking about self-image for all women. Now let's go specifically to the self-doubt and the insecurity that Black women have. The idea that your dark skin is unattractive, your thick lips are unattractive, your natural build is unattractive, the kinkiness and those beautiful dark coils of your hair is unappealing. Where did that come from? Who gave us that idea? Who convinced us that light eyes are prettier than your dark eyes, when your dark eyes and my dark eyes are dominant? So as I'm explaining this to them, then we ended up talking about biology and the dominant and recessive traits. And so I explained to them that dark hair, dark skin, and dark eyes are dominant. Now, why does the bearer of that which is dominant feel insecure about that which they have that is dominant and desire to have that which is recessive? Where would that thought have come from? And why would we have been given such thinking? So I'm looking at this dark-skinned girl with her dark hair, her dark eyes, and her dark skin. And I'm watching her in a blanket of insecurity. And so what I explained to this young sister and the rest who were in the room is that we have been trained to have a recessive mindset. And in that recessive mindset, we reject that which about us is dominant because we have a desire for that which is recessive, right? So this is just self-image, right? This is about self-esteem and self-confidence. And this is individualistic, because I'm talking to this young lady about her thoughts that she thinks and the thoughts that many of the other girls I'm sure have thought, the thoughts that I thought myself growing up. But now let's apply this to an entire people. Let's apply this to an entire population who have been physical slaves in a country that we still exist in, and we still have the superior and inferior context in our minds about those who oppressed us. And so I had to backtrack and just touch on this history because I could not explain this thoroughly without going back in time, right? So the saying that you have to understand your history or you're doomed to repeat it, I had to take them back so that they can see where all this began for us and how unfair and the mechanism that people who did not dominate us physically had to employ to keep us subservient, docile, and in some control. They had to convince us that we were inferior. They had to convince us that they were superior. And in that convincing, they didn't just use the physical, meaning the hangings and the lynchings and the torture and the trauma that they did. They didn't just use physical brutality, but they used mental brutality by demeaning and degrading that which is inherent about the Black man and the Black woman. So much so that we began to think that it is because of our Blackness, it is because of the thick lips, it is because of the darkness of our skin that we have been subject to such a condition, not considering that there must be something about a group of people, there must be something about them that they would do this to another people, right? We became the object, right? And so as we became the object of their brutality and the object of their torture and of their trauma and of their barbaric behavior, we assumed all of the responsibility, even though it was done by someone else. We assumed the responsibility. It must be because right? It must be because instead of it must be because they. So because we assumed responsibility for our mistreatment, then that created in us a recessive mindset, even though we are not a recessive people. But we had to have a recessive mindset to endure, to have a system such as American slavery be sustained. We had to have a recessive mindset about ourselves. And that recessive mindset continues in 2020, even though we go to science class, we go to biology class, and we learn about the dominant and the recessive traits, or the dominant and recessive genes, right? Dark hair, dark skin, dark eyes, dominant. Light hair, light skin, light eyes, recessive, right? So now we have a recessive mentality and a recessive mindset. And so we act with recessive behaviors, right? So here we are, a people that in any other way, every other way, is dominant, just naturally. And this isn't Black superiority. This isn't any kind of hype. This isn't rhetoric. I'm talking about your natural self. I'm talking about you just naturally being dominant because you were born Black. However, society, where they talk about nature versus nurture, how naturally you're dominant, but you've been nurtured to have a recessive mindset. And so what do we do when our people have a recessive mindset? Then we have to teach them. We have to teach them and give them the history lesson that I shared with those young women so that we can, one, understand that we are not a recessive people and that we act in a recessive way because someone has shifted our mindset, right? They weren't just barbarians physically and brutal physically. They were also barbarians and brutal mentally. And so that is the trauma that we continue to carry with us generations and generations post-slavery, right? And although, we are talking about ways that we are free and have all of this opportunity, right? But we're still doing it with a handout as if we are asking for permission because we have not established something for ourselves in a way for us to express our dominance, in a way for us to express that which is inherently superior about Black people. So what I want to say as I wind down in this episode, there is a danger in the dominant having a recessive mindset. We will always undervalue ourselves. We will always look to others for guidance because we think that we are inferior. I know what we say. I know what we say, and we'll talk and go back to Egypt and Africa and the hieroglyphics and Hotep. I know. We'll go through all of that. And we'll talk as if we believe we're dominant, but we act as if we are recessive. So we have to take our people back in time through this history and help them understand that our inactivity, our latency, our inability and our refusal to come and do something for ourselves as independent people do, that is demonstrative of an inferior mindset, that is demonstrative of a recessive mindset. But brothers and sisters, you are dominant. You are dominant. And so what a clever trick that was played on us to convince the dominant that the dominant is recessive and that the recessive is dominant. And so now we have the dominant walking around with a recessive mindset and acting with recessive behaviors. And so we have all of this genius and brilliance just bubbling under our surface. However, we're only allowed to express it when it comes in the form of some kind of entertainment, whether it's singing, it's dancing, or athletics. But what about the power of our minds? It is a dangerous thing when the dominant is operating with a recessive mindset. We have to change this, and this needs to change today. I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Until next time, stay in peace. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, norahmuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@noraspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.